When I was younger, about 13 I would say, my mother was the person who first saw within me the potential to be an author. I didn't at the time. And I guess that was possibly because she gave me the subject matter which I should write about, which was sickle cell. And at the time, at that age, that was the last thing I wanted to be talking about. It's the last thing I wanted to be discussing. So I didn't think it was possible. But I did love to write, and I did have an amazing imagination that took me to many, many places. Later on in life, I joined MySpace, which was really quite forcefully done. People saying, "No, join MySpace, it's the big place to be." So eventually I did join, and I saw there was a blog section, and I just started writing. And I didn't actually realise that other people were reading what I was writing. I just assumed that it was my personal page and I could write about whatever I wanted to write on there. And the subjects I would write about sometimes would be my everyday things that I would be going through, from taking my children to school to different observations and so on. But I would do so in really a comical kind of manner. And then eventually I missed one day of posting, and someone contacted me and said, "What's going on? You used reading, I sacrificed reading my newspaper in the morning to read your blogs, and you haven't posted one today." I'm like, okay. So at that point, I became I felt like I just been revealed. And I didn't feel like I wanted to write anymore because I didn't realise there were so many witnesses. And it's one of those things where, sing like no one's listening, dance like no one's watching, and I was writing as if no one was reading. So to find out that people were reading was a little bit of a shock, and I didn't know whether I wanted to continue. But it was in me so much by then, and it had created such an amazing freedom that I chose to keep on writing. And the feedback I've always got is, "When are you going to write a book? The things that you write about, oh my goodness, my mum used to say the same thing. What is it that people are seeing?" The biggest thing I thought was an issue at the time was, how does a person go from writing page 1 to 100 and whatever? Then, after hearing this over and over and over again for several years now, out of the blue, a friend sent me a text, and it pretty much said, "The only change you choose to accept is to write a 2,000 feel-good short story that includes 1, mayonnaise, because it's one of my favourite condiments, 2, a waterfall, 3, a Black Panther, and 4, a photograph." And those are pretty much all the things I used to be into. Anyone who knows me, that's what I'm about. So I thought, okay, I can do this. Now, she gave me a week in which to do this. And I thought, yeah, I can do that. So I didn't start writing initially. I thought about it for the first 5 days, and then on the 6th day, I only had 1 day left, obviously, in which to complete the challenge. And then I just started writing. And the following day, she texted me again and said, "That's it, stop. Whatever you've written, send it to me right now." And I said to her, "Well, I kind of feel like I failed a little bit because I can't write a short story. I'm actually on chapter 6 and I think it's going to be a book." And that book became The Mouth of Babes, the first one that you see up there. But then once I started writing, I think I got about 1/3 through the book. And I thought, actually, it looks like it's becoming more and more like sci-fi, and I didn't really feel confident in that, because I didn't really know anybody else who was doing it. So I took to the internet and did a search for Black females who had written sci-fi, and the name that I found was Octavia Butler. So I'd never read any of her work, but just knowing that she existed was enough for me to take the plunge and just try on writing. Then I got to the stage whereby I thought, now that I've started writing, I actually can't stop. I think this is going to be a trilogy. Obviously, it became more of that. And it was fun. was like I had finally found my bliss, my form of expression. But then even when I had finished the book, that was my personal achievement. I don't really think that I felt I wanted to share it with anybody or, put it out there and publish. But then everybody else started saying, "Need to publish, need to publish, need to publish." And I thought, I got gassed up by everybody else's belief in me. And sometimes that's what you need, somebody else to believe in you more than you're ready to believe in yourself. So then I went through the process of doing research to find out exactly how to go about that. Now, one of my biggest fears at the time was that this became my personal achievement. And hearing of what Sophie Stewart had gone through, I don't know if you are familiar with the name, but she is known as the mother of the Matrix, and the one who was not really given the attribute that she should have had, the attribution that she should have had for having written the Matrix series and also the Terminator series. So then the last thing I wanted to do is find that somebody else is going to copy my work, because that came from the heart. That was personal to me, So rather than publish or find somebody else to publish me, I thought I was going to self-publish. So I started doing some research on how to do that. Over time, I started learning a lot, but then I kind of burned out of all that energy that everybody else had given me. So although I went through many of the processes, I stopped and I got the book printed out, but it didn't have any cover books anyway like that. It was just a plain blue book, white writing, mouth of babes, and I put I'm very much into writing down my dreams, goals, and aspirations. So at the back of it, instead of putting a bird, I just put something around. I haven't looked at that in so long, I can't remember the actual words. But I wrote something like, "This is the best-selling book by Tosin Coker." And I put something like "Barcode Yet to Come." So that's what I put out. And then I just shoved it in my cupboard, and I left it there for several years, for a couple of years I think it was. Then I think it was at the end of one of those years, a couple of years later, I got a letter in the mail, and it was by the British Library saying, "Where is this book?" So apparently I had gone so far in the publishing process that they were now expecting this book from me. So basically, when you publish a book, within a month of publishing of that release date, you're supposed to send a copy to the British Library. I didn't know that. So this letter came, and it threatened to fine me if I didn't hand them a copy of the book. So I'm like, me pay a fine for the sake of doing something that I love. And I think I just got so indignant, and I thought, I'm not paying money for that. So I actually followed through and published the book and released it properly. Another thing that gave me a push as well was actually my husband, actually. He wasn't my husband at the time, but he did a search on my name for some reason in Google, and my name came up on Amazon that I had written this book. And I think, how did that happen? How did that even, how did it even get up there when I hadn't put the book out as of yet? So when I did the search myself, I saw that, Tosin Coker, published by My Information, 2007. I'm like, damn, because so many people at that time, self-publishing was still relatively new. People were always asking questions like, I don't know how to get on Amazon. And I was there without even having tried, as far as I can know. So I felt that I think it was time to go through, and I did publish the book. But at the time, when I put the book out, I was so... I didn't feel like I was worthy of actually selling the book, so I went around just giving it to people. Just here, just read, And the very first book shop that I did finally go to when I was ready to take it there said to me, "Well, sis, I'm just going to be honest with you. I've known you for some time, but this book is not going to sell here because we mostly sell non-fiction. Fiction just doesn't do it over here." So I said, "Okay, well, take a copy of the book and read it for yourself and see what you think." A week later, when I went back into the store, the brother just ran up to me, gave me a big hug and said, "This book is amazing. I can't put it down because every time I do, something else tries to steal it off me." So again, I thought, ooh, head got a little bit big, it felt a bit gassed, and I thought, wow, people actually like it. And one of the biggest fears I had about publishing was revealing so much of my own thoughts. Was it going to be accepted? Were people going to reject it? Were people going to actually maybe, if they did read the book, have a problem with some of my viewpoints and the way I display certain things? Because I'm not really a religious person, and sometimes just speaking to a religious person, you can get into a debate about why you don't believe as opposed to why you do. And in that book, I put a lot about spirituality and so on and so forth. So I felt quite exposed and I felt a little bit bored. Then another time I went to the same bookstore again, and this time the owner of the store said, I need you to take down this number and give the guy a call. And I'm like, no, who? And he said, can I look at your bags? He's really interested in your book and he wants you to call him. So I was like, oh my goodness, I'm going to be cussed out by a professional. So eventually I did call, and I'm telling you, my armpits were sweating buckets because I thought I was really going to get a professional bollocking. It was the absolute opposite. He actually loved what I wrote, and he said, you know what, I have to stop reading for a long time because I feel like I've read everything there is to read out there. But this has really reawoken my love of reading, my love of books. We need to make this into a movie. So again, I felt quite a bit gassed up by him, but he was saying that because of the way I had put a couple of animals, like speaking animals, in the book, he didn't feel like it would go down well within amongst our people. And he said, we want to make it to people instead. And I said, well, you can't really do that because the story's going to go and you don't understand why. So we didn't really get further with it at the time. However, though I thought it was going to be a trilogy, it then went on to be a quadrilogy for a while. And then I've now written a fifth book, but I took it back and made a prequel to the whole series. And it's been a marvelous journey. But one of the key things that Leasha said that really gave me food for thought is the thing that made this book so special is that for the first time I'm seeing us in the future. Black people don't write themselves into the future because they don't believe that we're actually going to be in it. Which is a very deep statement. And the truth of the matter is, we see it all over the place, playing out, but we don't yet acknowledge that it's actually very true. Not only do we not see ourselves in the future, in some ways we're not actually welcomed into it by modern society. So for example, when you hear about the uproar of John Boyega being the Starship Trooper, when you hear the uproar about the young girl that was in the Hunger Games, the young black girl, Rue, so many people got so upset by seeing a black character in such a prominent position because not only have we failed to put ourselves in the future, we've given other people, we've reaffirmed to others around the world that we don't deserve to be there. And so science fiction has become something so much more to me than just me enjoying myself. It's now actually stating to other people that we're here and we're going to continue to be here for a long time to come. It's so important. So, one of the things that I have found as well is, aside from not seeing ourselves in the future, as black females, we are often underrepresented, unless we're seen as being maybe very voluptuous physical objects of adornment, sexuality, and so on. So again, it is important for me to write about a woman who was powerful, a warrior, and just see what I wanted to see characters that I envisioned, that I found were empowering. And the reason why is because I hope that when other people read it, they will feel empowered and be able to envision themselves in the future, because the moment we start thinking about something, we give it more power by then writing it down us still by continuing to ponder on that thought, so that thought gains momentum and actually empowers us to actually be where we visualize ourselves as being. And that's why writing is so important, and reading also. As for whether I found any difficulties, to be honest, I think one of the things that has taught me most is, as much as there's this belief that black people don't support one another, I keep on hearing that black people don't support one another. Actually, we do. We do. Look at your here now. When we continue to see these things and then start to affirm them, we give it power and make it come true. And so we need to kind of change that for ourselves by writing what we want to see in the future. Because one of the things I've also found is that when I have come across other science fiction authors, whether from here or across the pond in the States or anywhere, we always paint a very dystopian view of the future, as if we are coming to an end, as if we don't expect to actually really be able to thrive in amazing, powerful communities. And that's what I wanted to change, and still do. So it's amazing to see all of you here, because obviously you believe that we're going to be in the future in a very powerful manner as well. With The Mouth of Babes, one of the reasons why I wrote it in the manner that I wrote it was because there were many questions and answers that I wanted to put in there. So in a sense, it was almost like a conversation with myself, but I also felt that if I was going to have anybody read it at some point in time, that sometimes with the ego, we don't necessarily want to hear truth from other people. So I wrote it as though it was coming from a child asking all these questions. And interestingly enough, even though I did that, there have been many people that have told me it's too difficult to read, or and I've actually been asked to dumb it down. So it's interesting that the feedback I've had, on the one hand I've had such amazing feedback, on the other hand I've had feedback that basically suggests that we're incapable of really understanding certain things, is that we don't have critical thinking skills. And so it's so important to really get into finding and supporting other authors and artists that are trying to forward us into the future, because of course it's where we belong. We need to be able to start uplifting ourselves. One of the things I'm always hearing is, when we see maybe movies, and why does Hollywood do this? Why have we written this, that? Why are we expecting other people to write our stories? First and foremost. Sitting back and hoping that someone will portray us in a wonderful light. But look at all of us here. That's our job. Because when someone does portray us, then you start to think, well, they didn't do it correctly. Then you be the one to do it. Be the change you wish to see. Any questions, by the way?
Questions?
The lady over there?
Oh, really?
Yes.
Yeah, I didn't really understand what you meant by saying we don't see ourselves in the future.
Well,
I do, but I know many people do, so.
it was something that Felisha pointed out to me. He said that we don't write ourselves into the future because we don't see ourselves there. So basically, we have many people who write many books. There are tons of black authors out there. However, it seems like when it comes to science fiction, there are not so many. There are still plenty, yes, but not as many that maybe write maybe like gangster stuff or romance novels and so on. And I'm not too sure why that is, but when we do write ourselves into the future, it's usually from a dystopian perspective. So when Benedict pointed this out to me, he was basically saying that there's not enough of ourselves in a positive light out there. And while you might be a person who see yourself in the future. I remember doing a talk on a radio show several years back now, actually, and it was based on, I don't know if anybody remembers, a series called Flash Forward. Yeah? Okay, in that series, basically, everybody around the whole planet had a glimpse of themselves 5 years in the future. So I did something similar on a radio show, and I asked for everybody to see themselves 5 years into the future. And everybody who was participating on the show, this was an online radio, so there was a chat room where people could talk to me in real time at the same time. Everybody said, 5 years in the future is too far. I can't see that far. So it was interesting to realise that nobody had actually planned for themselves to be 5 years in the future. So I had to actually reel it back and say, okay, what about 2 years in the future? They said it was too far. So then I had to bring it back all the way back and I said, okay, can you see yourself 6 months in the future? And they said, oh, well, yeah, we can do that. So you may be one of a few, maybe all of us are some of the few that can see ourselves in the future, but it's actually not as common as you think. So even down to, for example, when we get a lot of money, we don't necessarily invest it the way we should be. We spend it on the now rather than planning for future generations, because in a subconscious manner we don't actually accept ourselves being around, or our children being around to enjoy the fruits of our labour. Oh goodness. Where do I draw my inspirations from? I was, to be honest, a lot of it's not from my dreams. Also, yeah, a lot of the things that I write actually comes from my dreams. But I guess also because I have sickle cell, there are things that I wish I could do that are more from a physical perspective. So the things that I would like to maybe be able to do, you know, I actually really enjoy taking part in martial arts and so on, and I would like to be able to take that further if I could have. So I created a warrior who could do that for me, who could express the things that I would like to be able to express in the physical sense. So some of that just comes from the reality, or the potential reality of not being able to do certain things right here, right now. But when it came to me being an author, or rather even having sickle cell, I used to think that I was very limited because of having sickle cell. But I've actually found that through writing, I can transcend beyond space, time, physics, and so on. And that's an amazing feeling for me. So, yeah, it's just about freedom. There's a lady in the back over there.
Hi.
Hello.
First of all, I just want to say it's a real pleasure to listen to you.
Thank you.
You're really engaging and interesting, so I just wanted to say that first of all.
Thank you.
Secondly, did you ever try to approach mainstream publishers? And then thirdly, you said that as a community we're not really representing ourselves. I just wondered what you thought about Hollywood, because they're clearly taking ownership of their own portrayal of storytelling, and it's a very powerful, rich industry, so I just wanted to get your thoughts on that. If you thought it was a positive expression or not.
It is definitely a positive expression. Although I still find myself very frustrated when I try to look into the sci-fi genre that is out there in terms of Nollywood. Because Nollywood is a force to be reckoned with. It's one of the top 3. I think it's actually #1 in terms of movie production worldwide. The industry is that large. But when it comes to, like I said, science fiction, I still feel that we're a little bit limited in how we portray ourselves, because we've got this amazing industry that is making billions of dollars yearly, and yet we haven't really made a proper movie that could be in cinemas worldwide that we all really, enjoy and appreciate. And although we are expressing ourselves and we're portraying ourselves, I find that it's a lot of the videos are very rugged, quite rough and raw, in terms of the footage and so on. And while that is wonderful, it would be nice to see something on the scale You know, I would love to be able to visit a movie, like for example, After Earth. After Earth was, to me, wasn't a great movie, but I felt that because it was portrayed and directed, produced and so on by people of colour, it didn't get the love it really should have. You know, I felt that it was, and I feel to a certain extent that the Smiths have been kind of pushed to the corner when it comes to futuristic, you know, portrayals of ourselves. Hello.
I was just wondering what for you like defining characteristics of science fiction.
I'm sorry?
What are the what are the defining characteristics of science fiction, and do you feel like your sort of understanding of it is there a major gulf between that and kind of the dominant form of it, which is obviously tends to be white men? I was just wondering what for you is science fiction, like what makes science fiction science fiction?
So, what science fiction
Yeah,
is to you?
what are the like defining bits of it?
For me, science fiction is pretty much those two words. It is very much based in science and speculative. You know, possible futures, possible technologies, possible abilities. I feel that it's a very, very broad spectrum, and we have yet to fully go into it. You know, how far it can be really explored. I like the idea of. I love space operas. I love things that are actually based in space. However, I think sometimes when people hear the term science fiction, some people feel like, oh, I'm not really into that. And I've actually had that from a lot of people who ended up being, you know, fans of my work. Their first thing they would say, well, I'm really into science fiction. But then when they read it, they was like, well, this doesn't seem like science fiction to me because I based it in, well, initially I based it in the present. And I think all things based in the present, really. But it does span across different universes and so on. But first and foremost, it was all about being here, based in the UK. And what I want to say, as well, for people who have maybe limitations of what science fiction is about, is, for example, the work of Octavia Butler, I thought was absolutely amazing with Kindred. I don't know if you've ever read Kindred. Okay, well, Kindred is actually set mostly in the past, with the protagonist being a black woman who is in a relationship with a white man. And somehow she ends up being transported far back into the times of slavery. And most people wouldn't really see that. See that the only aspect of it being science fiction is the fact that there was this transportation from from the present to the past. But if you read the whole book, it doesn't come across as science fiction except for in that manner, and yet it still is. So sometimes there are people who would ultimately shy away from science fiction, not realizing just how much it encompasses. It's not just about technology. It's not just about aliens. It's not just about space. It's about speculation of other possibilities and even other realities, other dimensions. So for me to even start talking about where I see it in such a broad manner. I mean, even I was thinking the other day, you know, we're seeing a lot of Marvel movies, Marvel comic movies and stuff like that coming out. What would that be characterized as? Would people say science fiction? Or does it have a genre of its own now? You see? For me personally, I think science fiction is unlimited by where your mind can take it.
Another question, Jared, is it?
Yeah. Hi. My name is Jared. I organise the science fiction book club, which is in London. And we're always trying to look out for books from different voices. We just happen to have 3 books, I think, this year by black authors. So I'm actually quite interested to find if you could give us a sort of basic, without any spoilers, a bit of a rundown of what the plot is of Mount Babes.
Okay, so The Mount of Babes is basically about a young girl called Destiny Kingsley, Teeny, is her nickname. She is being raised by her mother, by a single mother, after her parents have been divorced. But the fact that they got divorced has changed her path that she was supposed to be on. And because of this, her grandmother, her late grandmother, decides to put her into a coma in order to bring her soul to the spiritual realm and remind her of who she truly is and what she came to do on the planet. So that is what's really up in book 1, is basically the process of remembering who she is. And in that is explored a lot of questions from fear and how it immortalizes us, or how we manifest it, even down to, for some people, fear is so powerful, and it's the way it manifests is really by way of our focusing on it. So basically, the fear of her parents is what puts her life path in peril. So there's all kinds of things discussed, from why people die young. In some senses, a lot of people have told me that it's almost like a self-help book. I've actually been told by some people that it's become like their second Bible because of all the subject matter that's covered. In the second book, Let's Sleep in God's Light, she does regain her memory and remembers who she is. And basically, she becomes a teenager who, teenagers think they know it all, but this one actually does. So now it's her parents' journey of being able to keep up with her and also be humble enough to learn. The third, I don't think I'll go there, so I'm going to leave it at that. My routine process when it comes to writing. I used to require to be in a very quiet space, but then when I moved to where I'm living now, it was so noisy, children all over the place and everything. So now I tend to write with my headphones on, music blasting really loud. I prefer hip-hop instrumentals, jazz hip-hop instrumentals. I think I spend more time writing in my head than I actually do in terms of physically writing. So at any given time, if you see reads like this, I'm actually writing. One of the things I think that is important for people to understand, or potential authors to understand, is that the way you read doesn't have to be the way you write. So, for example, one of the difficulties that some people say that they have is having writer's block. Personally, I don't believe in writer's block. I think that once you start writing, the book pretty much writes itself. But if you try to force the direction you're supposed to go in, then the information or whatever it is that you're trying to convey is not necessarily going to flow as readily. So sometimes you have to be willing to just trust and just keep on writing. Most times when I might have an idea, I start writing it, but I don't know where it's going to go, and then by the end of it, I'm like, okay, I like that, As I said, I also write a lot from my dreams as well. So when I was about 1/3 through the first book, I dreamt the end of the third book. So I never write chronologically. I find that very limiting. So when a person says they have writer's block, just try moving and write a different chapter. If you know the bulk of what your story is about, then maybe trying to write from chapter 1 and going on to chapter 2 might not be the best way to write forward, where it work it out for you. So for myself, I write the first 2 chapters, then I will jump to chapter 22, and then I'll continue writing from there. Each time I'll be putting notes at the base for myself, which I usually highlight in a different colour, so I know that I'm not writing into that section. And I jump around. Sometimes I might start at the end, sometimes I might start at the beginning, but I don't limit myself into the order in which I have to write, because that's not how we think. If anything, I write how I think, and the way I think, I could be thinking about a good few things all at the same time. But then the most prominent thought is what comes out first. So don't limit yourself, if you have to be a writer, don't limit yourself to believing that you have to write the way you read. That can be further from the truth, at least for me anyway.
There's a question over there, any glasses?
Yeah, I think we're kind of merging here, so I'll just try to sort of go at what he's asking us nice and similar. So, okay, so there's two types of writers. There are people that really, really want, and then there's the pants that kind of just go in there. Now, it sounds like you're saying that you adjust a little bit. I want you to know how much you plan before you start. I know it's not just, but how much do you plan before you start? And what are your biggest challenges being self-published and having to get out of self-publishing?
Okay, my process, I would say, I would spend pretty much 24/7 writing in my head. You know, at any given time, if I'm watching the place, I'm probably already thinking a little bit more about character development and so on. But in times of actually applied writing, the routine I might go through more than anything is about actually getting that time to write to myself. I have a young son who's 3 years old, and every now and again I might write with him sat between my legs. And every now and again he might want to press the keys as well, so there's a little bit of a battle going on with that. So if anything, when it comes to actually sitting down and getting my writing done, I'm more about preparation to actually be able to do so and have a block amount of time. If it was up to me and it was possible, I would write without stopping. I wouldn't sleep, I wouldn't eat, I wouldn't do any of those things because I get carried away with that. I would say I maybe know about 20% of the plot. You know, I would know, I would say I know about 20% of the plot. But like I said, I sometimes feel that the book writes itself. But not only do the book write itself, I also feel that the characters, for me, demand what they want to be expressed. So, for example, I may plan to have a plot that is focused around one particular character, but then as I start writing, another character becomes a little bit more dominant, and then I find myself having to explore that character and why that one has suddenly become dominant, and then that would be tied in. So what I'm basically saying is that everyone's going to have their own method of doing things, but I think it's also really about listening to your way of doing things. You know, writing is a very personal thing to a certain degree because it's a one-person sport. So you can't necessarily try to compare yourself to somebody else and say, well, how do they do it? Because the way they do it might not work for you. So, like I said, in terms of the plot, I really have a very loose idea. So, as I said earlier, what I was given was just 4 items, and they're very random items. So the first 5 days, I was thinking, well, how am I going to incorporate those 4 items into the story? And to be honest, when did the waterfall and all those things, they end up getting written into there. But if I tried to write it as a short story, maybe I could have put them all in there. Do you know what I mean? Because it came so much later on as I got deeper into the story. So once you have your idea, and know what it is. Me personally, I would spend time pondering a lot before I actually start writing. I would also have a habit of having a notebook by my bedside. I used to just keep my laptop 24 hours a day and just keep it on the side of my bed, which obviously that's inconvenient. So now I just have a book by my bedside because I might wake up in the middle of the night and I just have something of an idea. I think it's important to maybe carry a book with you anywhere you go, anyway. Because you never know when you're going to be hit by that moment of inspiration. And though I might think in my mind I don't remember, because it felt so powerful, because the thought was so powerful at the time, by the time I actually get to a book, maybe if I'm traveling or something, by the time I actually get home to write it down, it's gone. So I would say, ultimately, you're going to have to find your own comfort zone for what works for you. But for me, I allow a lot of things to flow. I find for myself that once I start writing, it's almost like my body is just a vessel, you know, and then my thoughts just wonder wherever they're going to go, and then I just suddenly start writing. So there's times where I've written things, and I've come back to read it, and I thought, oh man, that's not where I thought it was going to go, because I thought that I wanted to write about this, and I might be adamant about where I think it's going to go. Like, for example, in the first book, I wanted to include information about the photon belt. I wanted to include the information about the photon belt, and at that point, I got writer's block, you know. But like I said, I don't believe in writer's block. So I tried and I tried and I tried and I tried, and I just could not force it in there. So as soon as I decided to drop the idea, then everything flowed. Do you see what I mean? So I wouldn't try to become too rigid. First and foremost, just start writing and see what happens. Because eventually you're going to start finding what is the best way for yourself. So it might just be that you might have to bullet point a few things that you definitely want to include. But then when you start writing, all of that gets scrapped. And it doesn't even make it into the book at all. So if anything, I wouldn't limit myself by trying to be a particular way or have a particular process. Because this is my process. But then you might go and sit down to write and it might not work for you. For me, I can write for, I think, the longest time I've been permitted to write what I want, about maybe a 13-hour stretch. But, and at that point, I think my husband snatched my away my laptop, so he was sitting, you know. And one day we decided to write together, because he writes as well. And I became infuriated because he stops every 20 minutes, you know. But I need this long, and he's like, well, why do you need all that time? Why, you know? And once I start writing, I can't hear, I can't see, it's just me and the laptop. So that's what I'm saying, that's my method, but it might not work for you. I used to be an IT tutor. Yeah, I used to teach IT. I also taught in more informal ways, but pretty much always been a teacher in one way or another. And then I specified a little bit more what I learned into IT. But because of my health, I've had to leave a few jobs because I actually found that the radiation of computers was actually compounding on my health issues. So, yeah, writing is not what it is. Sometimes it's people I know. For example, one of the soldiers in my book, Ilias, I drew inspiration from my brother. My brother used to love to skateboard, and so I incorporated that Ilias liked to skateboard. My brother also used to do a lot of martial arts, so again, Ilias became someone who is a professional in martial arts. It might be I might just see someone on the train and I might really like their hairstyle. I think, oh yeah, you know, my characters don't look really good with that kind of hairstyle when I go to the descriptions and so on. So, yeah, it's sometimes it's from the people, but I try to do it in a manner that it doesn't reflect them so much that it becomes intrusive to who they are.
This event is brought to you free so that you can enjoy it, but it costs us £250, £250. There's a blue box at the back, so please help us to hold the cost. We can charge you, but we try and make it free. So help us out with the cost. It costs us £250. So you find it by yourselves, you can there. But that's the general second